This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and it is a Sunday, and this is probably as close to being religious and attending church as we're going to get on this podcast, or have been so far. Maybe we will in the future. But this is Reverend Bill Bean, the spiritual warrior who performs exorcisms on both houses and people. He's knowledgeable in all areas of the paranormal, from what I understand. He has been inside the wrestling ring. He's delivered a couple clotheslines, and he's had numerous interactions with professional wrestlers outside of the ring when he was bouncing. So we are going to get into some of his wrestling stories. This will not just be purely about the supernatural, but to start this off, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Hannibal. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
And I forgot to mention that you've actually appeared on The Haunting a couple of times. I think they covered your own story in one episode, and in another you were exorcising a house or something like that.
Yeah, I've actually been in 7 episodes of that series. And yes, you're right. The first episode was covering my story because I was once a victim. And we'll get into this, as we go along in the interview. But I was very much a victim, and my family was greatly affected by demonic forces, and I was as well. And I'm happy to tell you, and I didn't come here on your show to preach a sermon or anything like that, but I did come to speak truth. And the truth of the matter is that God truly transformed my life from victim to victor. And I can never thank him and praise him enough for that.
I see. Well, I have had some paranormal experiences myself, living in a house that I think was haunted for sure many years ago, which I didn't last there long, but I was less knowledgeable about that realm in those days. But I'll be perfectly honest with you, I'm not totally sold on the exorcism of people. And maybe one day, I would really love this, if you would take me along on one of your house exorcisms, because I would love to one day actually be there to experience that and record that. But you want to tell us basically what you are, a certified reverend, but what you do and how you got into it. You've got a long backstory. You actually have numerous books out. We'll put the links to the books in the description.
Thank you.
Without going too crazy into your backstory.
Well, first of all, yes, I would, and I don't do this. I don't take people with me. I mean, I have in the past, but I don't anymore. But in your case, yes, I would. So you could come and experience it for yourself and document it. And this is very real. And it may seem so foreign to you and to other people. And that's a good thing, because may you never experience anything like this in your life ever. I can tell you, as a living witness to this, that affected my family first. And, this is why I believe God called me to do this work, is because I was there. Hannibal, I suffered all of this, and my family suffered as well. My mother suffered more than any other person I've ever seen suffer in my life. And so this is where it all comes from. I've often said in my interviews that I couldn't be where I'm at right now in helping people had I not been there. And there's a lot more to my work than just going and, as if that isn't enough, going and performing these types of things, because I have to tell you, it's totally draining after it's over with. I don't have anything left when it's done. But there's more to it, though. I'm every bit as much a counselor and a life coach as well as I am this deliverance minister / exorcist. So my approach in this is, of course, I'm going there to help the people to become free from whatever may be taking place, whether it is a full possession or something called demonic oppression, which is the step before that, or some type of attachment or curse, hex, vex, or spell, whatever it may be. But there's also times that I've gone to counsel with married couples that were having problems, or even businesses brought me in to be a mediator because they were having problems between the management and the staff and things of that nature. So, boy, oh boy, have I ever been around the block when it comes to just about every type of thing or scenario that you can imagine, associated with this type of work. So, but it all began when my family and I moved into this 3-bedroom ranch style home located in Glen Burnie, Maryland, in a community called Herondale. Now, I've written 6 books, and in the first book, which was called Dark Force, I say that it all began there. To be honest with you, after writing that book, I found out additional information that family members many, many, many years ago, two in particular, actually conjured up these demonic forces through ritual and through invitation and invocation. And these demonic forces came on the family, created a variety of damage. And I feel that my parents were led to that house where evil was already present and manifest. And so I've often said that, we were in the perfect storm of these evil forces that combined and greatly contributed to the destruction of my family.
What was the first thing you noticed that really made you a believer? Because I'm not sure how young you were when you first started noticing this stuff, but at some point you may not have been fully sold on the supernatural, but at some point you must have been like, okay, this is something I've never experienced before.
Well, I was 4 years old when we moved into the house. Now, the A Haunting series, they portrayed me as, I don't know, 11 or 12 years old. And I don't know why they did that, but I'm very grateful to them for airing the story because that's what put me on the map. And
Yeah.
so I'm very, very grateful to them. And I have some good friends over there at New Dominion Pictures. But the truth of the matter is, I was 4 years old. And I could tell you, at age 4, my sister was 13. Um, we were standing together out in front of the house before moving in, and we just had this awful feeling. The house was semi-dilapidated. My father was just an expert carpenter. He owned his own construction business and contractor, and he saw it as a restoration project. And I recall just being frightened, Hannibal. The first time standing in front of the house, my sister said that she felt the same way. There was just something about it. Now, all life operates on frequency and vibration. So if we were on high frequency, high vibration, life is good, life is positive, you feel good. But when you're on low frequency, low vibration, life is a challenge to say the least. And there's always a problem, a situation, a drama, and never an answer. That's where the devil and his demons are, on the low frequency and low vibration. So when you have those feelings of dread and just the skin crawling and the goosebumps, and evil is present. And so from the very beginning, we knew that something was wrong. And my mother was the first to have an experience in the house. And it wasn't long after moving in. It happened in the living room while she was unpacking and organizing. My dad, William Bean Sr., had taken us, and again, I have an older sister, a younger brother. He had taken us with him for the day over to his parents' house to allow my mother to unpack and organize in what they thought would be peace without us bothering her. And it was during the course of this that she felt the presence come into the room. She thought that it was my dad sneaking back in to play a joke on her. And she spun around fully anticipating on seeing him, and her shock, nothing was there. So as you can imagine, she was unnerved by it, but eventually able to go back to doing what she was doing. And then my sister's bedroom door slammed shut by itself. And that was enough to make her go outside and wait until we returned. So that's where it began. And then it gradually escalated into several different types of noises or chairs rocking, footsteps. You'd hear walking in the attic. You'd hear a chair rocking out in the living room. There were times that you would hear footsteps coming down the hallway. And let me tell you, the house was equally as ominous and foreboding on the inside as it was the outside. The house was very dark, and you would walk in through the front door into the living room area, and it had this dark brown paneling on the walls, almost black. And so the house was always very dark, even on the brightest of days. And so then you would make a right down a long hallway, which had 3 bedrooms down there in the bathroom. And it was this hard tile on the floor. And oftentimes, I recall laying in bed, hearing these footsteps, and it sounded like boots or heavy soled shoes or something coming down the hallway, and it would reverberate off of those paneled walls.
I heard you tell the story. I think your brother at one point saw your dad lifted and
Yeah.
smashed to the floor.
Well, my dad was a very, very, he was a tough guy, Hannibal. He was a man's man, and very stockily built. He was not a tall guy, but he was, very short and stocky. And according to my brother, now I was not there on that night. I was staying at my grandmother's house. But according to my brother, and my brother, it's like you got to pry it out of him for, he still has a problem to this day because of the things that took place then. He's still affected by it. So every once in a while, he'll talk about it. And this is, I guess, about a year ago. He mentioned this, that he witnessed my dad coming in. My dad was in a drunken stupor, came in. He comes in through the front door. Now, what I failed to mention when describing the house is when you would come in through that front door, you're entering into the living room, but facing that front door, it was like a coat closet, and it had two sliding doors. And so, according to my brother, and believe me, he'd have no reason to make this up because it's still very, very painful to him. He told me that he saw an unseen force grab my father around by the throat and lift him and throw him right through those doors. Now, again, there'd be no reason for him to say this if it were not true. And I certainly believe it based on everything that happened in the house. I was attacked physically many times myself over the years, but my mother was attacked, physically attacked, and suffered far greater than anybody involved in this story.
Why did they stay in the house for so many years? You'd think they'd move you guys out of there.
Well, I think what happened was, and it's so sad, it really is the whole thing. Um, my parents were married in 56. My sister was born in 57. Um, there was another child born in 1963 who died under mysterious circumstances, and I never could get to the bottom of it. And there were varying accounts of what actually took place, but what everybody agrees on is the child lived for a short time. And then Johns Hopkins sent representatives out to retrieve the body for studies. So I don't know what happened there, but something definitely mysterious happened in that case in order for Johns Hopkins to send out representatives for studies of the body. So I was born in 66 and my brother was born in 69. By all accounts, my parents were happy, and my sister recalls, very good childhood memories until getting to the house. And then things began to change. And my parents were social drinkers. They would have, back in that time frame, uh, you would have the family over for the house parties and all that kind of stuff. It was common back then. So they were social drinkers, but as the paranormal supernatural activity escalated in the home, my dad, I really, Hannibal, looking back on this, and I'm not trying to make excuses for my dad's behavior. Believe me, I'm not. I'm just trying to come to some conclusions on this in my own mind. I feel that, especially if he truly was attacked in the way that I described, that would be so just defeating for a man like that, that, was used to being in control of every situation. And then to have something like that happen, I truly believe that it damaged him to the point to where he was probably trying to escape reality. And so this increased his drinking. He started staying out in the bars until late at night, and he would come home. And then obviously my mother was upset. She wants to know where he's at and why he's doing these things. And then, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say this, it turned physical, and he started to physically abuse my mother on a regular basis between 1973 and 1975. He nearly killed her on several occasions. I can recall being a young boy, 7 and 8 years old, having to run out of the house to get the police called on my father because he was absolutely killing my mother. So these are horrific memories. And furthermore, I have no doubt, by him being in the state that he was under the influence, that these demonic forces were actually able to manipulate his rage and anger towards my mother. And it is a miracle from God that he did not kill her. So he ended up leaving us in 1975. And he left us in such a bad way, wasn't sending any money home. And here's something else that I failed to mention, is that my mother was very ill. She was very sick the entire time that we lived there. She was suffering from high blood pressure, which led to strokes, which ultimately led to kidney failure. She couldn't work. And so after he left, we had to go on welfare. And it was, again, so horrible for her because she never in a million years saw her life turning in that direction. So not only did we have this paranormal supernatural struggle against these demonic forces, we also had the life challenges of the day-to-day living now. And, with my dad being gone and not sending any money home, it was horrible. So the house, they ended up losing the house because my mother couldn't make the payments. They held a public auction in the front yard. I'll never forget it. I witnessed it. And so this man bought the house and he knew of my mother's situation. And so he let us stay there on a pay as you can, when you can basis. And your question there is the most frequently asked question, how and why did you stay for so long? My aunt wanted us to come, my mother's sister wanted us to come stay with her. She had 8 children and a husband. My mother was a very proud and private woman. She was very ashamed by the things that were taking place, Hannibal. She didn't want anybody to know about this, but she did confide in her mom and her sister, and then Mrs. Davis, who was the neighbor up on the top of the street. And my grandmother wanted us to come stay with her, but she and my step-grandfather shared a 1-bedroom apartment. And again, my mother was not going to be a burden to anyone. So that's how we were able to stay with this man purchasing the home in this public auction. But I'll tell you, to be even more frank, as the years went by, each and every one of us came under some form of demonic oppression and manipulation at certain times. With me, it was going and lighting the woods on fire. We had this big ravine behind the house, and it stretched for several miles. And there are stories and rumors about there being an Indian burial ground down in there. So my home was not the only home affected. There are many other homes that were affected in the area also. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but it wasn't until a haunting aired the story, then all of a sudden, these people from the area came out of the woodwork telling me about their stories, and including some friends that I had back then that I didn't know were having these types of problems. But that's why we stayed. And again, we were greatly affected over the years. I'm ashamed to tell you that I engaged in that behavior of setting the woods on fire and all that, but I did it. It nearly cost my brother his life. I would take my father's gas can that he had in the garage and go down and pour these circles and then light it up. And it was a compulsion. I mean, it wasn't something that I was ever interested in or anything like that. The best way to describe it, it was a compulsion. Now, look, the devil didn't make me do it, but I'll guarantee you he was aiding and abetting in it when I made the choice to do these things.
And one thing I found interesting, I think it was either your website or YouTube page, was you put a video on there from, I guess this house was in Baltimore, and it was a local news story about everything you've been through. But in the same news story, it showed the people that lived there whenever this was filmed,
Yeah.
and they were saying there's nothing going on there. So I was surprised you would actually put that on your page. But what explanation do you have for the current residents saying they haven't experienced anything? Did the forest leave the house?
No, I don't think. Now, I will say this. When people are affected by evil, and whether, again, that's through attachment or oppression, possession is the final stage. That's when the enemy, has conquered the person. But it is through attachment and oppression. When a person is under that, this garbage will follow them no matter where they go. I could have moved to the other side of the earth, and it would have still followed me and my family members as well. With that clip, and that was on Fox 45 in Baltimore, I put it there, Hannibal, because I want people to know the truth. I'm real, and I'm speaking the truth. The truth is the truth. There's no substitute for it. Now, that said, Fox News went down to these people. I don't know the people. And if they needed my help, if they contacted me tonight for help, I would go and help them. I don't know them. I saw the clip and I saw what they said. Contrary to what they've said, I was contacted. And if you noticed in the video, you saw the no trespassing signs up, on the home and all that stuff. What was happening, and I'm very sorry for this, I have never publicly given the address of that residence out, nor will I. But people figured it out. and furthermore, the story got so big in the neighborhood when it was happening, people already knew anyway. So people were going down to the home, and I guess they were bothering these people. And I understand, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause them any problem, but I have every right to talk about what took place there because it did take place. So, I don't feel bad about that. I have every right to talk about those things that happened that affected me and my family. However, I didn't wish to cause them any problems or torment from people coming down there bothering them. Now, they said what they said. They said the only evil thing was Bill Bean and his books. It's all a lie. He's a fake. He's a phony. It's all made up. And they have every right to say that. But it doesn't change the fact of the matter. And the fact of the matter is that those things did take place there. So then after that, I was contacted by someone that claimed to be best friends with this lady. She told me a different story. She said that those people have had problems there. And furthermore, the lady is now sick and is wheelchair bound, and no doctor can figure out what's wrong with her and all this kind of stuff. Now, look, is this person really her friend? I don't know because I don't know these people, but this is the message that I got. It wouldn't surprise me a bit, but even though the people there, have such a bad opinion about me, I still wish them well. I have no hatred or malice towards them. Wish them well. I've actually prayed for them, and I hope that they do have peace there. And I don't even know if they're still living there or not because that story came out quite a while ago. But I just want people to know the truth, and I want them to see the good and the bad. So, for everything that I say, and I always say, if you've listened to my interviews, you hear me say it, don't take my word for it. Do the research. And you did do your research, and I give you credit for that. But, people are free to say whatever they want to say.
Now, do you think it's possible that the case of Chris Benoit, where he murdered his wife and small child, could have been demonic related, as he wasn't really known to have the personality that would do that type of thing before? And I believe alcohol was also involved, from what I understand. So maybe that would have helped open those pathways, and possibly in theory.
I'm glad you're bringing this up because I never met Chris Benoit, but I've read about him. I've really dug into this thing over the years because, like you, and I think you and I, and maybe this is why I wanted you to interview me, because we have this in common that we're truth seekers. And boy, once I get something in my head, I want to really dig into that and get at, why this happened. I always want to know why people do and say the things that they do and say. And in this situation, without knowing the man, just based on maybe seeing some videos or photographs of him, I will say this. I do feel that he was spiritually affected in some way. Now, what way? I don't know. And perhaps it was something that happened in his childhood for all we know. I don't know. But I do feel, and here's another thing, and I don't want to be disrespectful to Nancy. I don't want to be disrespectful to anybody, but let's speak the truth. The truth of the matter here is that Nancy, whether it was a gimmick or not, was with Kevin Sullivan in that devil worship gimmick. And Hannibal, we have to be very, very careful when we cross into these areas. I'm telling you right now, we have to be very careful because even though it may be an act, the devil can still come in through that. Even though it's an act and there's no real intent to summon or anything like that, the devil can still use that as a legal right, and God will allow it because of free will. So perhaps, without really knowing the answer, perhaps there was something there that may have been attached to her through that type of thing. And then definitely looking at videos and photos of Chris Benoit, I would have to say that I do feel that he had something spiritually going on very wrong in his life.
And according to reports, a lot of the information I've read, he was always a strong atheist. If anyone brought up religious stuff, he would cut it down. But supposedly, in the few months before his death, he started becoming more religious. And I guess there was a Bible left near his son after he killed his son. So that's was one of the unusual things about those killings.
I just can't wrap my mind around it, and again, I've read so much and dug into this so much. And how do you how can a person, and look, I've dealt with every type of situation that you can think of. I have been in life-threatening situations where people wanted to kill me. Believe me, I've been in those types of situations. I just, I really, again, looking at some of these videos and everything, it looked like he had so much love for his child. Okay, things happen domestically between, a husband and wife. Certainly, it should never go to that level. It shouldn't go to any type of physical level when there's problems between a husband and wife. But then when you bring a little child into this, I mean, how in the world? I just can't, even trying to visualize that just makes me sick to my stomach. I don't understand it.
The horror that the child must have been feeling is horrible. But you brought up Kevin Sullivan's name. I know that you actually had an experience with Kevin Sullivan. I would consider myself friends with him, but do you want to tell me your experience? You ended up having a friendly conversation, but it started off a little unusual.
Oh, it sure did. This was, I'd have to say, probably late 80s, somewhere around maybe, I don't know, 88, somewhere in that area. I was in a gym called Powerhouse Gym, and that was located, it's no longer there, but it was in Linthicum, Maryland, right near Baltimore Washington International Airport. So when the wrestlers came into town, they would train at that gym. So I was training by myself on that day, but I had a training partner who worked the front desk at Powerhouse, and I got to know some of the wrestlers through him. But on this day, I was training arms, biceps by myself, and I'm on the curl machine, and I try to mind my own business, Hannibal. I just try to stay to myself, but yet I'm working out, and I just happen to look up, and then over across the room, 30 or 40 feet over, I see Kevin Sullivan. Now, I know the wrestlers, and I knew that, it was Kevin Sullivan. He didn't know me. But I look over, and he's staring at me. And I'm going, okay, maybe he's looking at somebody behind me or something like that. So rest for a second. I go to another set, stop. I look over, and I mean, he is truly staring a hole through me. And I'm going, now at this point, I'm going, okay, what am I going to be in a fight here in a second or something? I don't know what's going on here. I mean, this guy doesn't even know me as far as I'm concerned. I knew who he was, but and so then he comes over, and now I'm preparing myself. I'm thinking, man, this could really get physical here in a second. And he comes over, and very quietly, he says, "Do you mind if I work in?" I said, "Sure." He says, "What's your name?" I said, "Bill." And he started to say, "I'm Kevin." I said, "I know who you are." And so from there, we ended up having a very good conversation. We worked in on the bicep machine, but boy, Hannibal, was that ever bizarre. I'll never, and I have to say this too. He must have really been living the gimmick back then, because he had these dark, and I don't know if it was makeup or it was just that he partied all night or something, but he had these really dark, I don't know. You'd have to ask him the next time if he remembers it. He had these really dark circles under his eyes, and man, he just looked very menacing.
I did party with him one time in Florida, so it could very well be his partying day in and day out back in those days. Now, you did talk about you've had some experience related to UFOs.
Oh yeah.
There's one kind of misleading podcast thing that says you're talking about UFOs, but it's hidden somewhere in this extended podcast, very hard to find in the clips. So I'll ask you now about what is it that you had as an experience with unidentified flying objects.
I've had many and continue to this day. And let me say this, and you've probably heard me say this on other shows. I feel that all this phenomena is related. In the very beginning of the Bible, it talks about God hovering over the firmament. And so I believe he was hovering over in a UFO, an unidentified flying object. So Psalm 68:17 says the chariots of God are 20,000. There are many scriptures in the Bible, mentioning, flying chariots, pillars of a cloud, clouds, flying rolls, flying scrolls, etc., etc. It's all through the Bible. So all of this is very much connected. I've had experiences with all of these different types of phenomena. And with the UFO stuff, I had the first sighting that I had was in 1977, July of 1977, and it was with my family and in that house. And my dad had left us at 75, but he came back for a visit in 77. And we were watching TV. I'd say it was probably, I don't know, between 8 and 9 o'clock, somewhere in there. All of a sudden, the power goes out. So my dad goes outside. He wants to see he's thinking that a car hit a pole or something and it knocked the power out. Well, he comes shuffling back in very quickly through the back door and collects us and takes us outside to see this strange object in the sky. And so from where our back door was, I would say probably 40 yards or a little more, there was this utility pole in the ravine. And hovering above that utility pole, very low, I would say probably, I would guess, my best guess on it would be anywhere from somewhere around 1,000 feet or maybe a little above. It was very low and made no sound at all. It was a brilliant white, and it was, I said, shaped like a mushroom, which I guess in essence might be kind of like the flying saucer type of thing. But it made no sound at all. It hovered out there. Other families came out in their yards, so they were witnessing this with us. And it stayed there, I'd say probably close to an hour, and then it started to slowly rise up in altitude, and then it just drifted away to the north. And as it went off, the power came back on in all the homes. So that was the first UFO experience that I had. And then in January of 1995, I started to have frequent UFO sightings. And again, I was not seeking these things out. They came to me. And Hannibal, I have to tell you, you just wouldn't believe it. You would have had to have been with me to see some of these things for yourself to truly understand what I'm saying to you and your audience as well. Very real. I've had on-duty police officers, a Maryland State police officer and a Anne Arundel County police officer with a cadet that pulled behind me. My wife was in the car with me one night, and I would say this was probably in the summer of 1995, maybe even 96, somewhere in that area. I saw this object that was literally over top of us, and it was staying with us for miles down the road. And then I pulled off. We were on Interstate 695, Baltimore. I pulled off to the right. My wife at this point, she does not want to pull over. She's panicking. What are you doing? You're crazy. I pulled over. I get out of the car, and I'm watching this thing. And then a state police pulls up behind me. He gets out. He asks me what's going on, and I point up there. I said, whatever that is, that has been following us for many miles now. And he's looking at it. It's a red object. And another interesting thing, on that night, it was like misting. So it wasn't raining heavily, but it was like a mist. So it was a very low ceiling. And this object was under the cloud ceiling like that. So it was very low. So then the Anne Arundel County police officer pulls up with the cadet. They get out. At this point, we're all standing there watching this thing. And so I think the Anne Arundel County police officer wants to go and get binoculars. And this thing starts shooting out. Now it's red. And it starts shooting out like these, the best way to describe it would be like laser beams or something. And it's all over the place. And then all of a sudden, it's just gone. It just darted off. And everybody's looking at everybody. And both of the officers said they would not go on the record for this. And we all wished each other a good night. And that was the end of that. But I've also had as many as 50 people in a group with me that have gone out, because back in that time frame, I'd say this was probably maybe 97, between 97 and 99. I started having these sky watches because I was getting local press. My UFO footage, my story, but the UFO footage has been on the 6 o'clock news, the 10 o'clock news, the 11 o'clock news. So it's been covered, very widely in the area. And so I started taking these people out on sky watches, and people started to see these objects with me for themselves.
I haven't seen your footage yet, only the pictures, so I'll have to look that up.
I will absolutely send you some footage. I know it sounds like crazy talk, but I assure you that it is true. Everything that I'm telling you is true. And sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. And so um, I
Was
don't
that the
know
last
why.
time you saw them? Was that
Oh,
like
no,
a
no. My goodness. So this went on from regular sightings, went on from January of 1995 to 2008. And I find it interesting that in the year 2008 is when I really, for many years, I had been on a path trying to come closer to God and do good and do right. And I've always had it in me to do good and to do right, but I've made some very bad mistakes. I could probably write a 500-page book on the mistakes that I've made in life. So it wasn't until I was really sincere about changing my life and wanting to do better, because I have to tell you, for a good deal of my life, especially after the tragedies that had taken place with my mother and grandmother dying 2 months and 2 days apart from one another, after that, I was finished. I didn't want to live anymore. I didn't have any desire for anything. I was just trying to get through the day. I ended up lying about my age, quit school in the eighth grade, went to work for a construction company, worked with some really hardcore individuals. That made me a hardcore individual. And now I started to make a lot of mistakes. I grew up on the streets. I drank, I did drugs, I was violent. I'm ashamed to say all those things, Hannibal, but the truth is the truth. And I'm thankful to say, and I praise God for this, that, and it wasn't until I decided I was going to make these changes and that I really wanted God to be first in my life that a real transformation began to take place in my life. So around the year 2008 is when that transformation really started to kick in. And then probably by 2010, between 2010 and 2012, I was in full swing at that point, ready to become this spiritual warrior for God. And it was very much a calling. It is something that I never wanted. Once I was free from evil, I thought, no way am I ever going to, get involved in anything like that again. I don't ever want to experience anything like that again. Yet, God had this plan for me. And the best way to describe this to you is that I would wake up in the morning and I had this feeling that it could help people. And I would just try and resist it because I had a very low opinion of myself. And so then it would stay with me throughout the day. And it was the last thing that I thought of before I went to bed. And I thought, God must really have a sense of humor, because what could somebody like me possibly do to help anybody else? I'm the king of making mistakes. What could I possibly do to help somebody to move forward in their life? Well, it wasn't until I started to really engage in deep studies of many different things that I started to get a little bit of confidence, because for so long I felt so inadequate because of my lack of education. So I thought that I could never be anything positive and I could never be a service to man in any way, shape, or form. But then when I committed myself to these studies, I started to gain knowledge, and I praise God for blessing me with wisdom and knowledge far beyond anything that I could ever imagine in my life. And with that, the confidence came. So then at that point, and also the A Haunting thing, again, is what put me on the map. They aired that. The show aired on September 7th, 2006. And so they're still showing that episode to this day. Um, I was getting contacted by people from all over the world asking me for spiritual help at that time. Now that's 2006. I'm not then where I am now. I'm still trying to get out of all the garbage. And so I would refer them to other people. So that's where it really started, with the people contacting me for help. And then I felt that God really was putting a calling on my life to be able to go and help these people. So that's how the whole thing started. And I have to tell you this, for me, it was the greatest thing after the first family that I helped. It was the greatest thing to know what my purpose in life really is. Just there's no feeling that could match that in knowing that God actually worked through me to help somebody.
So how is it exactly that you are able to clear these demons, and what are they? Because like obviously some people are inhabited by demons, some people just have poltergeists in their house that are more mischievous, I guess, and some people have like things replaying in their house that are paranormal. So I guess there's different types. So how do you deal with all the various types?
Well, when it comes to the poltergeist activity, I'm pretty black and white on it as far as uh, if we feel the presence of God or angels, it is a very loving presence. It will make you feel good. There's a blessing associated with that. So it's all goodness. If you are experiencing things that are in a negative nature, which some people would disagree with me and say, no, poltergeists are not demons. If something is creating a disturbance and it is something negative directed towards the victim or victims, that is evil. So you can call it a poltergeist all you want, but it is evil in nature because there is intent to create harm and torment and problems. And that is not of God. So, for me, I'm pretty cut and dry on those things. But now with the ghostly phenomena, I feel that some of the activity, and I don't quite understand it. I don't pretend to understand it because I don't think anybody truly does. But I do feel that some of the ghostly activity could be like the best way to equate it would be like some type of energy stamp or essence stamp that was left here. And it's like a DVD player on loop that just goes over and over and over and repeats the same type of scenario over and over and over again. That's some. And then there are other cases. And I do believe, for whatever reasons, God will allow our loved ones to come back and check in on us once in a while, but we have to be very careful because the devil mimics everything that God does. And he can send what's called a familiar spirit, which would take the shape and form of our long lost loved ones. And it's a devil in disguise the whole time. So this is where we are to test the spirits. And in testing the spirits, now, if I saw something like that, if something like that appeared to me right now on this interview, I would test the spirit, and here's exactly what I would say. I would say, Yahweh rebuke thee in Jesus' name, depart, and be very authoritative. You have to be authoritative. Um, if the thing suddenly departed, then we know it's evil. If it stayed, then we know that that is not evil, and it is someone that God has sent to come and check in on us. So there's definitely levels to this and variables as well. For me, Hannibal, am I perfect? No. Do I claim to be? No. But I try to be a good man. I try to do the best that I can do, and I try to be the best that I can be each and every day of my life because I have to be somebody to somebody every day. So, with that said, I have to keep my connection with God like this because I need his spiritual guidance and discernment to be able to know what I'm doing. And so that is my life in a nutshell. That's who I really am. And that's who I try to be each and every day of my life.
So, what are the poltergeists? If you can just kind of tell them to go away, where would they go away to? And like you mentioned, the level that the ghosts are on, is that like a low level of spiritualness? Like, what happens? Why can't they go to the higher level, the higher dimension?
And that is beyond my understanding to where I think perhaps it's some kind of spiritual essence that was left behind. So maybe in fact that person did move on, and I pray that God did take them into his heavenly kingdom, yet there is this timestamp, this spiritual essence that's left behind that repeats over and over and over again. Now I fully don't know the truth on this, and I don't think anybody ever will, but that's my best guess on that. And with the poltergeist phenomena, again, if there is if there's a spirit that say a person can feel the presence of a spirit and the spirit is peaceful and is not threatening, there's nothing in any way that would suggest that the entity is trying to cause harm to the person or family or whatever, that would not be in the evil realm. So again, if there is poltergeist activity to where the entities present are causing any type of harm, torment, or attack in any way, well, then that is demonic, and they are part of the devil's demonic kingdom.
Now, I've enjoyed playing with Ouija boards in the past, but I haven't had anyone that has wanted to play with me in recent years for various reasons. What is your opinion on how they work, and do you think they're dangerous or not?
Yeah, I think they're very dangerous. And so again, God gave us free will. So we're free to make our choices. We can do anything that we want to do. God will not intervene in that. However, the reason that the devil exists in the first place, because he is the adversary to mankind. He serves a purpose, and this is why God doesn't destroy him. He serves a purpose, and his purpose is for the person that makes the wrong choice. There will be a consequence. So when we're doing, and I would caution you, and again, you can do whatever you want to do, but I would caution you not to do that, because even though you don't have any intent to invoke anything, it is there nonetheless. So the devil, he deals in legalities and legal rights. So if something like that takes place, now there is invocation through invitation, knowingly or unknowingly, and he will come through. And so God will allow it because of free will. So we have to be very mindful and very careful. There may have been periods in your life to where you suddenly had this rash of just one bad thing after the other happening over and over and over again, and you're throwing your hands up in the air going, why? How can I don't understand this? That is a spiritual attack. We are, all of us, we're in a sin-filled world, okay? So we're born into this world that is just rotten to the core, to be honest with you. This is where faith comes in, because even though we're in this sin-filled world and in this rotten world, we can still have a good life. But the devil never stops. And I believe this, Hannibal, that God assigns angels to each and every one of us throughout our life. The devil mimics everything that God does, and he assigns demons to every one of us throughout our lives, and they just look for openings. And when they see an opening, man, they're going to kick that door in and come through. I have had clients from very high positions, and then people that are just down and out on the streets, and every type of person in between. And you would be shocked at some of the people in the high places that had me come and help them, and then were just crying like a baby that their lives were just absolutely in tatters because of this garbage taking place. One man, I try to keep confidentiality. Let's just say one man who's pretty high up in what he does called me for help, and he was just, and this was a man in a position of authority and had to be a strong man. He was crying like a baby, Hannibal. His wife had divorced him. She had great malice towards him. And according to him, she had people that she knew in New Orleans and went down there and placed voodoo curses on him. And this guy's life was in misery. And I'm happy to tell you that God worked through me to help him. But prior to that, this guy was, he was begging for help. He was in a bad way.
Interesting. And I recently interviewed Lex Luger, and you told
Hmm.
me a story that you had some personal contact with him back in the days before he found God, and
Yeah.
your overall experience with him was so good, but you saw a piece of that narcissist character that he played so well for numerous years.
I really did. And look, I wish Larry the best. Good for him that he's doing well in his life, and God bless him. And I have to tell you this too, Hannibal, that I was sort of like him at one point in time. I was a very arrogant individual myself. And, back then I was very strong. I could bench press 500 pounds. I felt like I could just bust through a wall. And, I had this level of arrogance to me. And then a devastating shoulder injury humbled me very quickly. But I had a couple encounters with him, and one, I worked at this nightclub called Hammerjacks. That's where I first met him. It was in Baltimore. It's where the Ravens stadium, the parking lot sits there. That's where Hammerjacks used to be. And so then I went on to manage security at this nightclub called LA's, which again was near Baltimore Washington International Airport. And the wrestlers came, they stopped going there and they started coming into this club LA's. And so, one night, Lex is there. He's and this was a very big place, very, very big club. And he was at the first level when you come in through the door. And he was sitting there with a lady and he's having a drink. Now, he was not bothering anybody.
You
And
said he
so
was a
this,
ladies' man, right?
yeah, absolutely. And so he was not at fault here though. Some guy comes up and starts bothering him. And so I see it. I sent some of my guys over to, get this guy away from him. They get the guy away from him and then he comes back. So now I go over. And so we remove the individual, we get him out. And so then I come back to Lex, and I'm apologizing. I was sorry that it happened to him, and he was just, I don't know how to say it. I don't know if he would remember it or not, or if he'd even want to remember it, but he was very arrogant. I did my part in apologizing to him, but boy, um, he was less than gracious. We'll say it like that. And so then they left. But interestingly enough, I saw him again after that, and we did have a nice conversation on the next occasion that I saw him. But yeah, that was he probably remembers that.
And another guy that I've interviewed that you've had an experience with is Road Warrior Animal, and I guess you almost actually came to a physical altercation with him at one point.
Thank God we didn't, right? He was a big guy. He had to be about 300 back then. I was about, when I was at my peak as far as power, I was benching 500 pounds, and I probably weighed about 235 at that time. He was 300. He was big. Hawk, I would say he was probably 270, 275, somewhere in there. Now, this happened at Hammerjacks, and I was working this VIP area. And they came through and they had somebody, it wasn't Paul Ellering, it was somebody else with them. And they came through and Animal was the closest to me. Now, this was, it just shows you, I guess, the level of stupidity that I had back then, or arrogance, or whatever you want to call it. I didn't fear anybody. And so they're coming through the door and I grabbed his left arm. And if you ever talk to him again, he may remember this if you mention it to him. I grabbed his left arm and they were moving so fast, it spun him. It spun him around. I was doing that because I didn't think they had permission to be in the VIP area. And man, he spun around, and he's looking, and Hawk's like behind him. And man, they could have, boy, Hannibal, they could have, like I said in the message, they could have stomped a mud hole in me at that point in time,
Yeah.
But nothing happened. And then I got the message that it was okay for them to be in there. So I felt like a jerk after that. But thank you, Joe, for and Mike. I know he's gone, but they had restraint because that could have gotten really ugly very quickly. Now I was alone in that area. We had 40 guys on that security staff. So if a call would have went out, they would have all came. But still, I was alone at that point in time. So boy, oh boy, that could have been a very bad night for me.
Trust me, I know what that's all about. Even when you're in a big place, you can be caught alone in bad situations. Happen to me. So I'm not going to get into that. But you had another story about Brian Pillman. He's a popular
Oh,
subject on my channel.
yeah. And that's a sad and tragic story as well, because I'm quite certain now I saw him at his worst, but I'm certain that he was a good guy and he, was capable of doing good and being a good person. But that night in particular, boy, Hannibal, this was at LA's. And I don't know what led up to this. I just know that I was the guy that stepped in between him and this bouncer that I had. He was the very baddest bouncer that I had on the staff. And those guys were nose to nose. So was it drugs? Was it a woman? I don't know. But what I do know is that I stepped in between them and I backed my guy off. And Pillman, boy, he was ready to fight. That's for sure. Both guys were ready to fight. And so Tom Zank was there with him, and very nice guy. And he was sober.
He
He
just
was
passed away last year, I think.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm
No, it
very
was
sorry to hear that.
mysterious. Yeah.
Did what did he pass from?
I forget the reason, but obviously it was another young wrestler death because he wasn't that old, but he had been off the radar for a few years and then the news came out that he died.
I'm very sorry to hear that. Nice guy, very, very good guy. Um, he was trying to defuse the situation. He was actually behind Pillman, and he was pulling on him, and we're going towards the kitchen now. So I'm using my body. I'm not trying to engage Pillman because I didn't want it to escalate into a brawl. So what I'm trying to do is be gentle in nudging him with my body. Zank's pulling on him from behind, so we're now taking him in the direction of the kitchen to diffuse this situation. So we get him in there, and now as we're pulling him away, he's threatening, the bouncer that's behind me that he had engaged with. So he's levying all kind of threats against him. But we get him in the kitchen, and then he starts to calm down. He asked me if he could use the phone to make a phone call, and I said yes. And so there was a wall phone to the left, and he grabs the phone, makes a phone call. After his call, it was like he was a different person. He was still trashed. Whatever he was doing, whether it was drinking, drugs, whatever, he was trashed. But he calmed down, was very nice. He shook my hand. He apologized. And Tom Zank continued to apologize throughout the whole thing. And then they ended up leaving through the back door through the kitchen. And that was that. But I could tell you firsthand, and unfortunately, and look, God bless Brian Pillman's family. I'm not trying to say anything derogatory against him or anything like that. I'm just telling you the truth as it happened. But boy, I'll never forget that night.
And to close this off, I'll put some of the links to your books in the description, but do you want to let people know where they can follow you or if they're having an issue at their home, maybe they could look you up for help?
Absolutely. And again, I want to thank you. I really appreciate your time. You're great at what you do. And this was another reason that I wanted you to interview me because you really intrigued me. You have a gift. And whether you know that or not, you really do. And so I think that you can really go far with what you're doing. You have many gifts, but this is one of your big gifts. And thank you again, Hannibal. And thank everybody out there for watching. And if there are people out there, if you're out there and you're listening to this or watching this and you're in need, don't hesitate to contact me. Visit billbean.net. You can email me directly from the site. If you want to purchase my books, my latest book is called Dark Force Revisited. If you want to get a copy of that, click right on the site there. You can get it. I'll personally sign it for you and we'll have it out to you very quickly. But, I've said this a million times and I'll say it a million and one. I'm a very busy man, but never too busy to help somebody. So please, if you're in need, don't hesitate to contact me.
And you're in the Baltimore area. I know you fly to places literally all over the world, but what's
Yeah,
the driving radius that you're willing to drive if someone needs to help?
8 hours. 8 hours. I just drove to a family in Akron, Ohio, a few weeks ago, and this is just this is another thing you'd have to see to believe, Hannibal. And I give God all the praise and thanks. I don't claim to be anything special. It's just God's power working through me. I drove there to help the family. And as I stated earlier in the interview, it's very draining when these things take place and when they're over with. So I went back to the hotel, rested for a couple hours, got up and got right back in my truck and drove the 8 hours back home. That's just the way it is because I know that I have to be back here and ready for the next client.
Well, if you're ever in upstate New York, that's not too far from me, and you have something where you think the client might be interested, and it's more of a haunting thing than a possession, because I know a possession is a very personal situation.
Yeah.
But I would really like to. It's been many years since I've experienced anything paranormal, so I would like to experience something paranormal.
We're going to make this happen. And I'm in New York all the time, and I'm going to be in the Carmel, Brewster area. Let's see, October 26th, Saturday, October 26th. And that is, I'd probably have to be in the Albany area in order for you to be anywhere close, correct?
Well, unfortunately, October 26th, we're taping an event in Messina that Shane Douglas and Justin Credible are going to be at in Buff Bagwell. But Messina, New York is close, Syracuse, those surrounding areas.
Well, and I have been to Syracuse several times, so I will keep that in mind, and we'll come up the next time I get a call from any of those areas. I'll let you know, and if it works in with your schedule, then we'll meet up, and you're welcome to come with me. And look, I don't want you to, certainly don't want you to have a bad experience, but I would love for you firsthand to see the power of God in action and see how these evil forces react to that and get out of there by the power of God. So the power of prayer is invoking the power of God. So the first thing that I do, if I'm going to a residence, let's just say the person is having either an attachment or an oppression, or they are having something taking place in the home. It could be something due to the land. It could be something due to previous owners or something that took place, in that home. Whatever it may be, the first thing that I do is I say a land blessing before I enter into the home. And then once I enter into the home, I anoint everybody's heads. I have a combination of holy water, holy oil, and holy salt. I just make the sign of the cross on their foreheads. And then I say several prayers right at the front door, including a house blessing prayer. Now, after everything is over with, I have to go through the entire home, because sometimes these things will lurk. They'll hide. They don't want to go. And so I have to go through every room, including the attic, and make sure that these things are gone. And I've had some encounters, one I'm thinking of right now in Gettysburg, that the demon was still there. And boy, oh boy, and I know we're running out of time. Do you want me to tell you this, or we can do
Sure, I'm
some?
always in. I've actually heard Gettysburg is one of the most haunted places in the U.S.
Yeah,
due to the war that took place there.
yeah, and it's true. So, okay, on this night in Gettysburg, I would say it was probably 2014. Um, I had performed, this lady was totally possessed. And so I performed the exorcism deliverance over this lady. And after she was freed, I had to go through the entire home. And this was a very large home. And so I go through the entire home, and then I get to the attic part. So it's a set of steps that go up. And the attic area is very large, and it looked like they were going to turn it into a master bedroom type of thing. So I'm up there, and I had actually had this young man that was featured in one of the A Haunting episodes, John Drenner, with me. And he's another young man that God worked through me to deliver. He was possessed as well. But anyway, he's with me, and we're into the attic area. There on the right side, were the windows, and next to the window furthest to the wall, closest to the wall, there was a ventilation shaft in front of that. So it was John who actually alerted me and said, I don't feel good about this area. So I walked over, and sure enough, he was right. There in front of both of us, I would have to say no more than 8 or 10 feet in front of us, in front of the wall, between the window and the ventilation shaft, was this figure, had to be at least 7 feet tall, all black, and it had red eyes. And I had a Bible in my right hand and like a shaker in my left hand. So I would shake and, put out the holy mixture, all through the house like that. So I recall looking at this. Now, think about this for a second, Hannibal. I mean, you're faced with something like this, and this is real, and most people would run. And so I recall saying, by the mighty power of Yahweh and his mighty and holy name, in Jesus' name, I bind and rebuke you, and I cast you out. And I, threw the shaker like that 3 times. This thing let out a screech like I have never heard before or since. And it was so loud that it rattled the windows. And then it departed. I will never, ever forget that.
Interesting. Well, that's quite a story to end off on, and we wish you continued success. We'll put your links in the description, and hopefully, one of these days in the not too distant future, I'll get to join you on one of your outings.
No question about it. We're going to make it happen. So, again, thank you very much, Hannibal. I wish you all the best, much continued success to you, and thank you to everybody out there for watching this.